Innovation. When you now think, well, I think my company should innovate, but we don't do it too well, or we try, but it's not really working. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. We today have the authors here from the Innovation Intelligence Advantage, a new book on the market. Hello and welcome, Kris Poria and Jeff Penrose.
Thank you, Niels.
Thank you,
Thank
Niels.
you. Thank you very much for taking the time, and we're getting straight into it. You talk about how leaders close the innovation gap and outpace disruption. Why, in your opinion, does it happen? Because most companies now know, okay, it is very important to innovate. However, most companies fail to innovate, or they do innovations which actually do not meet the demands on the market. Why, in your opinion, does that happen?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that a lot of companies focus on a strategy that they have built, and then they are only looking at based on that strategy. So what we call it, there's a lot of changes in the market. We call it exponential changes in the market, while companies are only working linear in terms of what they can adapt on daily basis. And that is where they keep growing that innovation gap. And this is where they put basically, there's a lot of gap in terms of how much they can consume from the market and what's happening in technology, in innovation, in geopolitics, in supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why they're normally stuck with that old system where they cannot consume, they cannot even identify those kind of opportunities.
Mm. When we now look into your book, one of the early chapters is why traditional R&D, consulting, and procurement fail, and that's a quite common. Many people say, "Look, when we're not really good at that, we just get one of the big names in there. You know all the big names. We don't have to mention them here. Why, in your opinion, does the traditional approach, where many organizations say, "Hey, this is proven by others. Others do the same, so we do it as well." Why, in your opinion, does that fail?
Maybe Jeff, you can take that.
Yeah, just let me deal with the consulting one to start with, because quite often, many big organisations that we've worked with over the last 6.5 years will bring consultants in to do a baseline for a particular critical technology or an issue that they have that they want a baseline. And quite often, what we find is that as soon as that report is published, it might take a year or two to create it. It's static.
Hmm.
And it's not dynamic enough to keep up with what's happening in the real world. So there's static artifacts that sit on the shelf and gather dust. So what we're saying is that you've got to have the data and the evidence to create a dynamic understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve that is regularly updated to keep you informed over time.
Mm. So you invented something which is called the Innovation Intelligence System. May you give me a bit more details on that? How does that work? Why do you think it's a good approach? What is actually new about this, where organizations can say, "Hey, we never thought about it that way." What can they expect from the book, and what can they get out of that?
I think I can take that one. So this is really interesting because a lot of organizations have different approaches when it comes to innovation, and they normally pick up one or two different, either a framework or some kind of market approaches, open innovation they call it. And what happens is they don't have end-to-end full picture from understanding what's happening in the market on daily basis, ongoing basis in terms of new innovation, new technologies, the new suppliers, and also because industry invests trillions of dollars on R&D, while some of even our large customers, like we work with a lot of defense customers, as well as a lot of large Fortune 500 customers, they spend billions of dollars themselves, but they got a big gap between billions and trillions of dollars. So some of them look into what they call it tech scouting, and some of the organization look into critical area of their programs, their key domain understanding. And so a lot of them, what they do is they got disconnected pieces. So what we bring here is we bring it innovation intelligence as a system where you look into not only what's happening in the market as of today, but what are your interesting and more critical domains based on your strategy that you need to not only map, but also monitor on daily basis so that you can get insights, including threats and opportunities into those domains. But then also on top of that, you have to have an actionable system where you can rapidly evidence-based problem solving, and we call it the challenger program, where you can pick up a specific challenge. You need to understand how to define even a challenge, because a lot of our customers, they define the challenge, but then industry doesn't even understand what does that mean and how do we respond to that kind of challenge. So our system, we are talking about that. How do you quickly define those challenges? How you quickly identify potential solutions? Maybe somebody out there in the market who's already solving those kind of problems. So you don't need to waste your time on something that somebody is already solving. So that framework. And the last piece we bring into that innovation intelligence system is the innovation navigator. That how do you understand the supplier side? How do you bring those suppliers, look into their go-to-market strategy, look into who are they competing with, what are the unique use cases into my organization, and how can I onboard them from the start, but then also later on, how can I sustain them ongoing basis? So basically, taking all of that together, normally when you pick up individually, some of those components are useful, but when you take it together, it's very transformative.
Excellent. I think these are brilliant insights. Of course, I have one questions here. One question here. When you now say this is the way how to innovate, we probably all know the example of Kodak. Someone within your organization has a brilliant idea. They say, "Here's the solution. I actually already have a prototype of that." And someone internally in the organization says, "Yeah, quite interesting, but this is not really what we're doing. You're basically cannibalizing our own system, so better put that in the back somewhere." And suddenly, from market leader, 5 years later, you're behind the market completely because you insist on doing the same of what you've done before. How can you implement your system without falling for the trap that you say, "Well, we still want to do what we did so far, and we're not going to allow anyone to really disrupt our own business model"?
And I think, Jeff, maybe you can take that.
Yeah, I'll start off with this one, and Kris, please jump in and join me. So, yeah, to avoid a Kodak moment, or another one is what we've come across when we first started, is some of our customers didn't want another Uber arriving in a country and not being
Yeah,
prepared for it.
yeah.
So there's lots of examples out there. So how do you prepare for those particular moments? And so we have a number of ways that we approach that, and we write about this in the book. There's a strategic approach with the ecosystem mapping to understand the ecosystem of what you're operating in. And that's a dynamic capability that's updated every 4 hours in our case. So if you're monitoring what's happening in photography, for example, and you've broken that down into the core themes and sub-themes, you need to monitor that to understand, are we going to be disrupted by new or emerging technology? Now, we've done this for a large mining company in the battery supply chain, looking at what are the new chemistries that are going to come in to disrupt battery technologies. So you have to have the right data and the right approach to understand the thematic areas that are likely to disrupt your business. Or conversely, you need to know what's going to disrupt you, like a Uber arriving in town to disrupt the taxi business significantly, or not have the regulations in place to regulate that. So you need to be proactively monitoring the global market, just not locally, just not reading articles, understand the dynamics of the whole technology innovation market.
Excellent. Do you want to add anything to that, Kris?
I think that's what Jeff has said is basically bringing that together. And this is where in the book, we are trying to bring that actionable knowledge that we have been already implementing for the customers and learning from that, learning from the failures, that what works, what doesn't work. And what we have done in the book, we have created all those kind of different parts of that system, that how do you do that based on something that we have already done it, so that you can bring that, what we call it, innovation flywheel, where you can keep sensing what's happening in the market, you keep understanding what does that mean, you keep making decisions, you act it, and then you keep repeating it on an ongoing basis.
Mm. Excellent.
Uh,
That's yes.
I guess I can I pick up on also what you mentioned earlier that someone might have a brilliant idea or a prototype that's developed within an organisation. So our response to that is that, well, you need to market test that. You need to validate on a global scale, is that idea unique? And that's what we do with our Innovation Navigator. We test these ideas to make sure, to see if they are unique. And quite often we find, we've done quite a few of these already, that there'll be hundreds of similar types of solutions out there. And then that helps the executive determine, do we need to invest in this capability, even for an R&D project? Or can we baseline it better by using something that's already available in the market, then focus on the real gaps there that are going to make a difference for us?
Perfect. And there's one very important question I have on top of that. You talk about the adaptive enterprise, a fascinating part in your book. And there's one part in particular where I'd like to have your take on, because you talk about the adaptive enterprise and the program advantage, get that, but there's also one chapter called the procurement advantage. Let's face reality. Many people say, hey, I work in R&D and we have a brilliant idea. And as soon as procurement comes in, it gets difficult because they will have their pitch process, they will go by the cheapest bid or what they call best value, but we have a different approach on what is the best value. So how can you align that? On the one side you want to have innovation, but on the other side, of course, you need to make it profitable. And with procurement departments, traditional procurement departments in place, people often struggle to achieve both. What's your take on that?
I mean, this is really interesting because we have seen that most of the procurement are based on panel. You create panel and you have to go through that process.
Yeah.
Mostly the procurement are engaged very, very late in the process. They got, of course, bottleneck risks as part of that process. And I think they normally struggle because there is no proactive approach and there is no alignment to the business side. When business is looking and defining their challenges, procurement is sometime or most of the time is not even part of that engagement. And that is where we call it that they need to bring discovery to the procurement. Discovery means that they need to understand the business challenges, as well as, of course, what's happening holistically across the key domains within the business and how proactively procurement people should be connected into that. So what we are saying here when we are talking about adaptive enterprise, we are saying that, hey, you need to bring strategy, you need to bring your programs, you need to bring your operations, you need to bring your science and technology R&D, you need to bring your procurement. Of course, you need to bring your workforce and supply chain as part of that holistic outlook of that innovation intelligence system. So what we are talking here is that innovation system is all connected and everybody has a view of that connected enterprise so that everybody can understand what I'm supposed to do proactively instead of falling behind, especially in case of procurement.
Excellent. And there's one last question I have, and I would like to have both of your points of view here. When now someone says, I think this is a really good point of view, and I'm going to buy that book. However, someone might say, look, we are a large organization. We are successful for decades in the market, and we are very traditional with our approach. And maybe someone buys the book who is not the chief executive or the chief innovation officer, and they say, I don't even know where to start. So when I'm now sitting here reading your book, agreeing on everything, how can I start within my organization that actually this gets into action and not becomes theory? We talk about, have meetings, have a task force, and anything ends up with just another report from a consultancy company. How can I actually have a call to action and bring everything into reality? I go with Kris first. What's your take on that?
So I think one of the things we have seen, this is a great question, Niels, and we have seen this time and time again, that implementation is one of the key challenge, right? With any new system, any new operating model. And here we are saying, do not consider this as a project. Consider this as a new operating model, a new system, and it has to be a permanent capability. You have seen how cybersecurity has evolved. When we started cybersecurity many years back, we started doing as a case-by-case basis, and slowly cybersecurity has become a permanent feature and a kind of an operating model that we have to keep looking for those gaps in cybersecurity. We have to keep looking for how do we adapt to any risk and any opportunities. So what we are saying here is the innovation intelligence system is a new operating model that organization has to have a permanent capability enterprise-wide. It is a continuous innovation. It's embedded into all those decisions in workflows, and it's evidence-based, not assumptions-based. And we have in the book, we have talked about a implementation model as well in very detail, how this can be implemented across the organization. But I'll just hand over to Jeff for any further comments.
Yeah, let's do that.
Thank you. It has to be a top-down approach and a bottom-up involvement. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but unless you have executive buy-in, these things go round and round in circles, as we've experienced over the last 6 years, and lots of time and effort and big dollars are wasted. There needs to be a senior executive who owns it and is responsible for actually making it happen and taking on board the things that we outline in the book as ideas to systematise this within an organisation. Sure, a lot of these bigger organisations will have innovation and R&D areas and all sorts of things are happening, but they're disconnected and they don't have the right data for the executives to make the decision, going back to the Kodak example and the other things we talked about earlier. If you're going to make a decision on that at a board level, you need the right data, global data, to make that particular decision. So you need that executive buy-in, executive involvement, and a real effort to change the dynamics of how you do this, including the procurement side of it. We could have a whole session talking about procurement, how it does stifle innovation. You can't be innovative by issuing tenders. It doesn't work that way. You have to proactively understand the market and know what you're asking for before you go to market. And be aware of what it is that you're asking for. Otherwise, you get the usual suspects, as they call them, and nothing happens. So, yeah, we could have a session on that alone. So, yeah.
I think these are the perfect final words. The innovation intelligence advantage, how leaders close the innovation gap and outpace disruption. Kris Poria and Jeff Penrose, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you,
Thank
Niels.
you
Much
very much.
appreciated.